undertaken is A, flattering, but B, very, very positive for the industry, because now we can kind of get beyond the first question of, well, why openness and what is openness, and really start drilling into the more crunchy issues of, well, how do you do open, right? And does openness necessarily mean open source? And how do I manage a platform? And how do I develop this platform? And how do I avoid fragmentation? So, it'll be interesting to see, how Symbian progresses over the next 2 years. I mean, I think today what you saw is an ambitious press release and a good press announcement. It's natural, frankly, that Nokia bought the remaining parts of Symbian, because outside of Nokia there wasn't much Symbian distribution. So I think over the next 2 years they have to figure out how they can really, facilitate broad input and output for their platform. How they can ensure that all parties have an equal say at the table, and that the output of Symbian Foundation is something that the whole mobile industry and beyond can use. One point on this is that I think the licensing issue is particularly important. There have been a number of open source initiatives in the mobile industry, and I think that, again, openness is good, but just a blanket adoption of open source might prove to be challenging. What Limo has undertaken is a model that we call collaborative source development, which I think has parallels that could be used outside the mobile industry, whereby anyone who takes part in the organization, which anyone can join incidentally, anyone who joins Limo can contribute to the platform. Anyone who's a member of Limo can distribute the platform. Updates and modifications of the platform must be given back to the foundation, which allows us to maintain the platform and distribute a common version of the platform to avoid fragmentation and to ensure consistent implementation across network operator deployments. So, to answer your question again, so today's news is very positive for the mobile industry. It's another kind of proof point that openness is the future for mobile computing, and we look forward to seeing the progress that they make.
Bill, some of us get frustrated by the regulatory process in D.C. As somebody who sort of shuttles back and forth between D.C. and Colorado, which I much prefer being in Colorado, I got to tell you. It's easy to become cynical and jaded by what happens in D.C. because, frankly, there's stuff that happens there that you really can't change without spending an awful lot of money, and sometimes even when you spend a lot of money, nothing changes. I sometimes get the sense that we've got technology that is just so cool and moving so fast that you can't regulate it. In fact, you probably shouldn't regulate it, which is the other part of this. And there are some conflicting issues there. I mean, people don't want common carrier regulation, but everybody wants access and interconnection rights. Well, you sort of can't have both. If you want to be Title II, you've got to, give something to get something. And this whole regulatory silo thing, increasingly is disjointed. Makes no sense. Why should a cable company not have common carrier of last resort obligations? Because they're functionally offering the same services. And the regulatory process now, because it's so slow to move, isn't going to catch this fast enough. The marketplace is going to decide these issues, in my opinion. I mean, am I crazy about that?
Well, without answering the latter part, I don't know if you're crazy. I agree with you that the process is frustrating. I think with the advent of Google did a phenomenal job at moving the 700 megahertz auction and getting an open access condition, by their participation in the bidding. So if I were a entrepreneurial company like many of my clients are, I would say that the entry of Google into Washington is heartening, and I think they're going to press forward on the principles of openness, and they've been very consistent in doing that. And I think the other thing that they've been doing is trying to help facilitate the proliferation of alternative broadband providers. So they have entered into this joint agreement, the Clearwire deal. They have invested in Current, which is a broadband over power line company. That was a while ago. So we may not be having these kind of debates about open access if there's 10, 15, 20 different providers, and it's for broadband, and it's ubiquitous. I mean, I think that technology is going to shift the regulatory debate. I mean, it shifted the debate on access charges. It shifted the debate on broadband. My perspective on this is it keep changing the industry, keep changing, building broadband, keep building these services. And you're right, the regulators aren't going to catch up. I will say though that and I don't mean this to. I think there's some regulators here. It's been very frustrating as an attorney working with companies who are moving so quickly, trying to educate regulators about the differences in technology. So, when Vonage first came onto the scene, it looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it must be regulated and taxed like a duck. So it was very frustrating to say to the state of Minnesota, we don't know if a customer is actually in Minnesota or not. And they said, well, you need to go get a certification, and you look like a CLEC. And we didn't want to be regulated, we happy to pay the fees, but we didn't want to be regulated like a CLEC because we couldn't attest. In fact, the taxation was an issue because we didn't know how many people were in Minnesota. So, regulators, I think it's their responsibility really to educate themselves and learn the differences. And I think most of the companies in this room would be happy to go engage in that. And I think it's part of the responsibility of regulators and companies alike to participate in that process and dialogue.
So, keeping with this theme that I like to have, that life isn't fair, get over it. I'm just not one of these people that thinks, well, the game's not fair. No, it's not fair. It's never going to be fair. It has never been fair. Despite all of those things, most people who have closed business models like them because they're high margin, right? And my argument would be, that's partly what you can do, but partly what everyone has to live with is all networks and devices are becoming more open. This is unstoppable, isn't going to change. So if you could give advice to people who are in the service provider business about how to deal with this, embrace it, extend it, play with it, partner with it, buy it. I just don't see us saying we're against it being a viable solution to anything.
Can I pick that one?
Absolutely.
Sure. So I was a carrier, and boy, that's a really hard question when you're a carrier. So here you're a carrier, you go and invest in location-based services, and you build a whole infrastructure around finding out where all your cell phones are and providing services around that. And it's a huge amount of money and cost. And now you have little companies like Ribbit that bang on your door and say, hey, you should provide that information because your subscribers are paying for it, and your subscriber wants to share their location with the Ribbit service that they have. The carriers are stuck in the middle saying, yeah, except we've got a huge investment, and if we make that information available, then we're not capitalizing on the return that we expected in our model. So from a carrier perspective, I completely understand why it's quite difficult. From a user perspective, I also understand why, hey, I think I'm paying for this, I should be able to have the information. There's not an easy answer until you can, I think you suggested it, Gary, is come up with a way that everybody can benefit. So I'm hoping that happens, especially with location information. There's a great lot of services that we all have our minds on around that. SMS is another one. The fact that you have to be a carrier and be part of the SMS and have an SMSC and be able to send and receive an SMS is really aggravating. And the cost of sending and receiving an SMS through an aggregator it's somewhat usury. You think about it. So those are the kind of services that I know as a little company we would love to see come available through some sort of openness, or maybe user preferences. If you have a user and you want to expose those services through another carrier partnership or platform partnership like Ribbit, that would be great. Comments on the FCC, just going back, we had Commissioner Michael Copps came to San Francisco a few months ago, and he visited a couple companies. One of them was Google, the other was Apple, and the third was Ribbit. We had a phone call from the commissioner's office that said they want to come visit you. I said, you're kidding, dude. Really? Why us? We're 27 guys in an office in Mountain View. And the reason is because of this question you asked me, what is an open platform? And they wanted to know what it is because they're trying to get their heads around what happens if you can create an API that accesses the global telephone network, and you can cause phone calls to be made and transferred around, and SMS messages to flow, and location services to go in different directions. How does that fundamentally change all of the